Okay, great. We can go ahead and start the meeting. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
I have none.
Seeing none, we can open up public comment. This is a time reserved for comments and questions on topics not on the agenda. Time for public comment is included by default in each of the agenda items. Eric, do we have anybody from the public?
Yeah, there's no members of the public here in the room. I will
Oh,
mention
you're
that.
muted, or we can't hear you.
Oh,
I can.
I can, yeah.
can you hear me, Abby? But Brendan, you can. Sarah, you can. Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you
And Ruth, it looks like you can hear me as well.
loud and clear.
Okay.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Oh,
No, I can
we
hear
can
you.
hear you.
It might have something to do. I know I see Abby has a headset. I don't know if that somehow is making a difference.
I'm putting it on my computer audio. Was it me that just couldn't hear you guys? Or
That's-
can we hear Eric?
Can you hear me now, Abby?
Yes.
Okay, so then I think it was just you that
Okay,
was
sorry
having
about
the
that.
issue. No problem. So there's nobody here in the room for public comment. I will mention though that Connor is in the room with me, so he is here. I did receive comments about 5:30 today that I forwarded around to you all via email. If you haven't looked at them, that's fine. The comments I think are more related to other legislative items through Act 47 than more so I think than what we're talking about tonight, but still comments are there from a member of the public, from Michael Arnold. So you'll have those in your inbox and if you don't already. So otherwise there's no public comment.
Great, thanks, Eric. Let's move on to approving the meeting minutes. Did anybody have any edits or changes to the meeting minutes? Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I'll move. I'll second.
Okay. The meeting minutes have been approved from our June meeting?
Well, we
Or,
should
sorry,
vote on it.
everybody has to.
Yeah, we should vote.
All right, everybody in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody want to abstain?
Connor is abstaining.
Okay, I think now the meeting minutes can be approved.
Right, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 5, continued discussion on the ULUDR section 4.4 design review. Turn it over to Eric.
Yes, so we are here to continue discussion on design review. Specifically included with the agenda packet were the draft, was the draft text, or is the draft text that's been updated since our last meeting to include the changes that we discussed at the last meeting. But for tonight's meeting, I wanted to focus on the actual district boundaries where this text will actually apply. So I included a map in with the agenda packet. I included 2 versions of it, one with an aerial background and one without, for us to review. This is really just a place to start, I think. I tried to the best that I could, identify district boundaries that kind of matched up with what the intent of the design review text is, so that we can have some continuity between the two. What I'll do is share my screen here so that you all can see the big map, and we can zoom in and zoom out as necessary, so you're not trying to look at the smaller versions that you all had or that were included in the agenda. So give me 1 second here to get all my stuff reconfigured. So this is, here's the design review boundaries, some draft boundaries as presented. I identified 3 areas from some of the discussions I've had with my colleagues. Because this is technically an overlay, it's considered similar to a zoning district, but it basically applies additional regulations to the areas that are identified. So all the base zoning would still apply where these locations are, but there would be this additional design review component. So I tried to group it where there are a denser grouping of some of our historic resources that have been identified. So you'll notice there's the area kind of around just north of downtown on including East Allen Street in the yellow, part of East Spring Street. While there's not a lot of historic resources in the Mansion Platte Street area, it seems like that's kind of an important location just because of the nature of the buildings that are there. So I wanted to include those, and then some of the buildings across the street, across Main Street as well for one area. A second area kind of on the southwestern end of town along Canal Street, including the mills and a lot of the downtown buildings, and branching out over to this little pocket of resources. It is actually a historic district as well. It's, I believe, the Henry LeClaire Workers Housing District. So wanted to include that. And then the third area, which I'm a little not sure kind of meets the standards, is really St. Francis Xavier and the Our Lady of Providence building across the street. And the reason I have a little bit of pause about this is because it only includes 2 properties. So it could be, because this is akin to a zoning, it could be construed as spot zoning in this location, which is not permitted. So that's why I have a little bit of pause with this particular area. Having said that, because of the size of it, the amount of land area that's included, it's kind of a gray area. So it's possible that it may be okay. So anyway, I wanted to, that's just a quick overview of the 3 areas that I've identified. But really what I wanted to do tonight was to, get input from you all to see what you think about these, if they're too big, too small, if they should be contiguous or separated as they are, and yeah, kind of figure out the mapping component now that we have the text component. And we can refer back to the text if we need to. I've got those documents as well in front of me. So I'll pause there and let you all offer input.
Yeah.
Eric, is there a reason why, like the Champlain Mill, if I'm wrong, unless I'm wrong, the Champlain Mill is not covered by this, right?
That's correct. So that is in our downtown core zoning district, which already has a design review component because of the Act 250 permit that's there. So any properties in our downtown core, and actually let me just turn on the zoning here. Hopefully this won't be super washed out. But so this area in red is our downtown core zoning district. Any property that's located in this red area has to go through an Act 250 permitting process. As part of that process, the city council actually has to approve the designs of any properties that are there, and any projects that are there, because the city has to be a co-applicant on that Act 250 amendment. Additionally, through the Act 250 review process, there is a review of historic resources is included with that, along with a myriad of other elements. But because there's a separate design review process for the downtown core, that's why none of those properties were included with these districts.
And it's just the red we're talking about.
That's correct. Yes, that's
not
correct.
the-
Just this area in red,
It's
which is
not the
why.
C1. Okay,
Yeah, which is why the properties just north of that.
go on that.
Yep, are included, and the properties to the west are included.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay. I'd say one thing, just to go back, well, I don't mean to move the subject if people are still wanting to talk about that, but the Weaver Street, even though right now there's only 2 buildings on there, I mean, in the future, that lot could be sold, and we would probably want to have some kind of design review in that area if that was to happen, I think.
Is there a particular property you're referring to, Sarah?
Yeah.
Just the whole one in blue, right?
Oh,
The St. Francis one.
the St.
Yeah.
Francis.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood your comment.
Well, you were saying you were worried about that spot, that piece in blue, because it only has 2 buildings on it.
Well, there's only 2 properties is my concern.
Yeah.
But if the building was, if that property was to be sold, it could be highly developed, right?
Potentially. Yeah, there is potential. I guess also having said that, just to look at the aerial, I mean, a large portion of this is obviously the cemetery.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, that's right.
that's not going to get redeveloped, I don't imagine, but so probably
Probably.
somewhere on this southern end there could be, but it does include the school, the rectory, the church building itself. So there are several structures there. Again, I think given the size of the property, an argument could be made that it could be included.
Yeah.
But it's just something I want to flag because it is since there's only 2 actual properties in that district that could be construed as a spot zone. But
Yeah, but, I mean, who owns the cemetery?
it's part of the St. Francis Xavier property. It's all one property here.
Yeah, but is the cemetery considered anything else? Is it any kind of public land or any kind of public, you know what I'm saying?
Eric, correct me
I
if I'm
don't.
wrong.
It's private property, so
Yeah,
it falls within that realm.
but you can't just go in there, dig those all up and put big buildings in there. I mean, there's some regulations to the cemetery, I believe.
I believe there are. I don't know offhand, but I imagine the folks that bought the plots would have something to say about that
Yeah.
and the exhuming of the bodies. But I don't know the regulations around cemeteries.
Yeah, I'm just meaning that might help to make a better argument to say why not rope that whole piece of land in there, in this.
I don't want to.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to speak in finalities, but I would be surprised if the bodies were exhumed for redevelopment.
Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know that St. Francis Parish owns the convent, what was formerly the convent property, the one on West Spring Street.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think they own that currently.
So it's not necessarily one contiguous parcel here either that we're talking about.
Oh, that's right. It's not just there's 2 parcels, but it's limited. It's limited. There's a limited number of parcels in this one boundary area. Yes, but there are
Right.
2 individual parcels.
Well, and if it's a close call, we can put out this regulation, and then if they want to like sue to stop it, they can do that. I guess, I don't want to do anything that's clearly illegal, but I also think if it could go either way, and we think it's a good policy, then I don't see what's wrong with doing that.
Yeah, and I guess the point of me bringing that up is I intend to get an interpretation on that from the city's council, our legal counsel before moving this forward to any type of hearing. But I wanted to get some input from you all first about the boundaries in general to see if there's if
Well,
you
I
have
like-
any concerns.
I like that boundary around the blue
I
boundary.
do too.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I would say let's see what we can do with that.
I just my I guess observation about how these are drawn. I guess I don't quite understand the function of carrying it over so much onto Weaver Street and yet having that jog in the north left corner. Because if you're kind of looking at like a district, I mean, to have like that review stop mid-block there doesn't quite make sense to me as far as like kind of streetscape and cohesion.
Are you referring to this area, Joe?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm saying that like to me, having so much extend over onto Weaver Street doesn't quite make as much sense. I realize that there is a historic structure in there. I believe that a historic preservation professional might believe that even though the parcels fronting Main Street and West Spring here, the northwest corner here, that's not included.
So right in here.
Yes, even though those are not state historic register listed properties, if somebody was looking at a potential historic district, those buildings would be probably considered in part of a district.
So if if I'm understanding what you're saying, you would like to see this yellow boundary extended at least through these first couple of properties up to West Spring Street, but then also potentially taking these out from Weaver Street?
Well, I guess that's what I'm saying is I see less need of covering Weaver Street and more as far as design review for, you know, again, because we're not just looking at historic structures, we're looking at kind of
Right.
cohesion and how
exactly.
buildings are interrelating to one another. And so I see more sense in including that jog, those 3 parcels in this district rather than Weaver Street.
So basically kind of bringing it in along this line, and I will make that look like an actual line here in a second.
Unless just for coherence, as far as I understand, I don't think that the form-based code district extends that far into Weaver Street as what's being covered over there.
That's right. It only goes to the railroad tracks.
Okay.
So you're suggesting that jog, but then eliminating basically behind Levine's down through here.
Yeah, does that make sense to folks?
Why do you want to eliminate that piece that Eric's highlighted?
I guess I'm just kind of thinking that as far as if you're squaring the district, I would think it's more important to have those 3 on Main Street included rather
Because you're feeling like it's one or the other. Like you're being asked to choose one or the other. Would you choose both if that was on the table?
Well, I guess I'm saying though that just kind of making more of a sort of a clear district, I guess. I don't know if that logic. I mean, people can feel free to disagree with me.
I'm trying to look at my phone on street scene to see what is actually on that street. But
I'm just thinking that having having the design review stop in the middle of a block isn't good design practice to me.
Well, that by eliminating the one you just suggested there, you're sort of doing the same thing, though, right?
Well, I know that is a historic structure, but I don't know that necessarily needs to be included either.
So then we could actually do it like this instead. Oop. Do it like that instead.
Yeah. Because I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're doing a chunk of Weaver Street, I mean, there's some beautiful neighborhoods further north up Weaver Street that we're not including that have historic structures that are not documented. So I'm just saying, as though if we're kind of building around this core cluster, I think extending over into Weaver Street doesn't make as much sense.
How do others feel about that?
I'm not thinking that granularly yet about it. I have some sort of bigger picture questions. Eric, am I right that, so like this yellow district, for example, part of it's on Main Street, which is Gateway.
Yep.
So if a parcel is part of the Gateway, like this doesn't apply, right? You just need to meet form-based code.
So it would apply for demolition and for properties that fall below. So in the Gateway zoning district, there's a provision that non-conforming structures can make changes and amendments up to a certain percentage before they need to be brought into full conformance with the Gateway zoning district requirements. So this would apply. The design review would apply to the properties that fall kind of below that threshold for full compliance with the Gateway, or properties in the Gateway that would be proposing demolition. Otherwise, the rest of the changes would not apply for design review. That's how it's currently drafted. Well, the part about the non-conforming properties is already included in the existing language. We would be adding in the language that properties in the Gateway would only be subject to demolition.
Yeah. Okay. So it's enough for me to understand. So any any demolition, even if it's in the gateway, would still have to go through this design.
That's correct. If it's in a design review district, yes.
Okay.
That's good.
I don't want to keep asking if somebody else has a.
No, go ahead. I'm thinking.
Sort of jumping around too. So the southwest district, if you will. I guess how many have we been seeing a lot of housing projects down there, like proposed or redeveloped, or like have you seen a lot of activity down there, Eric?
So there's currently a project that's in design for, I believe it's this property here, 205 West Allen Street is the property, which I think is this last one. So there is a planned unit development that they had a preliminary plan before the Development Review Board in June, I believe. There is I believe it's this building, 130 West Canal Street, that is currently under some redevelopment to convert some of the office space that was in there to residential space. We've got Millhouse condos are on this property. Actually, let me just bring the aerial back up.
That would be helpful here.
Yeah. So we've got the Millhouse condos here. We've got the woolen mill on this basically larger piece. This is the Centerpoint School, and then this is the other mill, which I never remember the name of. Further west, where the Regional Planning Commission and some other offices are located. And then this is 150 West Canal Street, which is the old Four Quarters location and is now, it's still a Four Quarters location, but Vermont Sailing Center, Southern Smoke. I think there's a woodworking shop in there as well. So I would say there's some levels of redevelopment kind of in some of these locations, but we haven't seen a lot.
Yeah.
I think with that in mind, however, with some of the changes to state law, it does open up some of these properties to some additional development potential. Now, whether or not that happens is obviously up to the property owners, but there is some potential for that.
Eric, does the PUD on West Allen there, does that include removal of the existing structure?
It does not, actually. That was one of the
Right.
things that we worked with the applicants on, was to preserve the existing building as it is. I think there's a garage in the back that's in fairly rough shape that they're proposing to take down, but the building that's there now would stay.
Right. And I think that's isn't that kind of like the aim here with some of the historic buildings, is how to redevelop the parcel while still, I mean, that's a pretty substantial brick house, and as you say, is part of a historic district. I think that's kind of the goal. I get this feels a little weird to me, I guess, as far as how this is delineated.
Yeah.
I guess that it ties an existing historic district to another, cluster of historic buildings, but it feels like a weird.
That's kind of my thought. This in maybe so this sort of this northwest part here with like the few houses, is you said that's like an existing historic district, Eric?
If it's not a district, it's all the properties with the dots, and I guess I should have mentioned that at first. The properties with the dots are all currently on the state register.
It's a really cool couple of block in there. It's really neat.
Yeah,
all those
and
houses.
I believe, I'd have to look, but I believe it is a district. I don't know if it's a formally designated district, but it's referred to as the Henry LeClaire Workers Housing.
So what's happening on the south side of West Allen from where we have the district drawn now, going east?
These
Right.
properties in here?
Yeah. What's all that?
There's kind of a mix. I know like Consolidated Communications has one of their facilities in here. There's some, there's obviously a parking lot. Oops, let me zoom in a little bit more. So yeah, it's mostly residential, some larger buildings, some smaller, but.
So would it be problematic to include that strip as well, just so that this connects? I keep pointing at the screen like you can see me, but that just connects. You bring that line up.
I think we could, sorry, this lags a bit when the aerials are on.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting basically just drawing, instead of going on West Canal, bringing it straight across West Allen Street.
Well, this is kind of the issue is like, again, the problem was that we have talked about how relying on the antiquated state historic register is problematic. And here we're kind of building a district around the state historic register, what they have listed. And I think it's pointing us in the right direction, but there are probably, if you were going that route, you know, the neighboring buildings would probably be considered eligible today as well. You would be kind of looking more at that street rather than just those clusters.
Because again, we're not stopping things from happening there. We're just taking a second look as to how the street ends up looking, right?
Right, and again, just to reiterate, it would only apply for any of the covered actions that are included. So,
Right.
So general maintenance or interior work would not apply. Nothing interior would be covered by any of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Sarah, what you're suggesting though is basically just bringing this straight across.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I think that could be a really lovely street, actually. And if it connected more from the center of town.
Yeah, and I think if I'm correct in how I'm looking at this, what got listed from the State Historic Register are all they were brick dwellings that were, Francis Clare had a brickyard in Winooski, and he financed a lot of the building of homes for mill workers, but there's a lot of other buildings that are around it that are not necessarily of his construction that would be 19th century mill worker housing as well, like wood frame tenement buildings and so forth. So there's kind of this cluster in the middle of it, but looking more at that street, it just seems kind of weird that one house would be in the district and then the one next to it is not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. It does to me. Yeah.
Well, I think, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're trying to be careful about not being overly inclusive though, right? I think part of it is, I'll be honest, for me, I see this design review district as sort of it's like an existing way for us to relatively quickly add a layer of review to protect certain buildings that we think are important, right? So like for me, this is a vehicle to like create more protection for the mills down on like the south side of West Canal Street, which I like absolutely have no, like we should protect those. Like I don't dispute that. I think when we start, but if we start talking about like trying to make sure the neighborhood is cohesive and we're getting into more residential areas, I'm a little bit more cautious about that. So, to the extent that Eric picked these properties in the northwest corner because they're on the existing historic register, and then there's sort of a chunk just east of there that's not included, that I'm not as concerned about it. That's sort of where I'm at this point.
I guess this is also where it falls into we're not working off from our own inventory.
That's right.
We're working off a pre-existing, relatively old document.
Yeah.
Like as I said, in the 21st century, if a preservation specialist was looking at Winooski, they'd probably say like a lot of Upper Weaver Street, like that's definitely a historic district. But none of those buildings are on the State Historic Register.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I feel a little weird about building it around this, but
Well, on the other hand, because they were on a previous state historic register, there'd be no reason to believe that they wouldn't be on an updated one. So why not include those?
I think we are including the ones that are on the existing register. I think what we're discussing is maybe including some more that aren't.
And I think it's important to point out too that because we've had no regulation and still kind of don't have any regulation, we don't know what the condition of these buildings are currently from these buildings that were listed in the register. I mean, we obviously know what some of them are, like the Winooski block is still as it was, but we don't know if or at least I don't know if what was used to list these buildings in the first place is still a part of the building now and is still contributing to the building. So I think as a place to start, this is using the existing register, I think is a good starting place. And again, as part of this process, I think once we figure out what the boundaries look like, my intent is to do direct outreach to all the property owners to say, hey, this is happening, or we're proposing this for your property. And at that point, they can come in and say, I mean, nothing about my property meets any of the standards that you're trying to protect or preserve or anything. Or, great, this sounds fantastic, thank you very much. So I don't intend to enact this without allowing the property owners to provide some input on the direction we're going. But as a place to start, I think it's important to use the resources we have at hand. And you're right, Joe, to your point. I mean, right now, the state historic register for Winooski is almost historic. In a couple of years, it will be.
Right,
So,
right.
I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Well, because that's what I'm kind of getting at is that, what are you looking at then? You're looking at a street of historic buildings and how the streetscape is not just the buildings themselves, because it is a design district, not just a historic district.
That's what I thought this was also about. It's not just about historic, it's about the general feeling of the streets and the neighborhoods, right? Isn't that part of what this... Because we don't have, like, in the corridors, with the form-based code, it's very clear what the building material can be and what they feel like. But in these areas, there's nothing, correct?
I guess I would also feel that, I don't know if this makes any sense, but that's a less threatened area as far as historic structures. So like kind of emphasizing priority on that little section rather than, like I said, Weaver Street or, I mean, I guess again, this kind of points out where the city having its own inventory would be a lot more useful, because I find it a little bit hard to believe that, like Hickok Street, there's only one historic building in that whole neighborhood on the register. This is kind of exposing the gaps here, like that there's blocks and blocks of century-plus old buildings in that neighborhood, and yet there's only one on that map.
But it's the only one that actually has been probably documented. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably Chick's Market or something like that.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
The findings from the VHB study, I know it was Gateway specific, but are the findings of the buildings that they documented as historic incorporated onto this map, or can they be, or does it not? I guess it still does matter even though it's Gateway because of what you described earlier, Eric, but.
Yeah, I'd have to look to see if we have a GIS layer of that information. I know they did an ARC map, an online map for it. But I don't know if that was ever shared as a shapefile with the city or any type of geodatabase. So I'll have to look back at that to see.
Yeah, because it was a relatively recently commissioned study by the city to look at historic structures. So it feels a little bit, maybe even a little bit more relevant than the state historic registry. Because at least I know it's not the whole city, but at least we got, some part of the city looked at more recently.
And the other thing I was thinking about your comment, Joe, and I was just kind of looking at Weaver to see what you were proposing taking out, and you sort of mentioned maybe like some houses on Upper Weaver would be more appropriate for a historic for protection, and I could see that when I was sort of like looking at Google Street View, but I wonder like if the issue I'm kind of asking you a question like, with your knowledge of the historic buildings on Weaver Street, are the ones that you would be recommending were in historic district near the blue line that we have around the St. Francis property?
It would be. Again, I'm not a professional, but I know that basically between West Spring and Stevens, many of those I think I think many of them are Sears kit houses that were built around 1925. It was the same developer who built all of them. So like if you kind of look up that street, it has sort of it has a distinct pattern about it that is pre-existing there.
And in
Well-
2 years, those will be 100 years old.
Yeah.
And if that area was included in the blue line, then you would get you would get away from the only having 2 parcels in a
Yeah.
historic district.
Yeah, that's just what I was gonna say, Abby. It would
Yeah.
it would at least
Yeah.
partially solve the we're targeting St. Stephen's
Yeah, because-
problem.
Again, it's a pretty special row of architecture up along there. And it certainly creates a,
Well,
yeah.
Well, and I really want St. Francis covered. Like I think that's like really
Why is that?
essential, right? It's like the
Nervous about
style,
that?
basically. So if we need to kind of pull in some other houses to do that, I would be in favor of doing that in this
But I
situation.
think they're worthy of it. I think it's more than just pulling them in. I think
Yeah.
they are definitely worthy of,
I agree.
yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts at this point?
Just a question, Eric. The maps confuse me, I will tell you that right off, but what about the RVA building? Is that included here or is that outside?
It is not. It is just outside. It's basically, this building right here.
I mean, that is such a special building.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of the irony here is that that's not included in our district.
I know.
And that was Francis Leclerc's actual house,
Yeah.
but the other mill worker houses that he built are included.
Yeah.
Yeah, this property here is the RVA property.
I would really like to see that property included by extending some boundary if we could. I don't know what's adjacent to it though. My mind isn't showing me what's there.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, Tommy, is that like that is the kind of building where if there was a design review board
Yeah.
and that demolition was proposed for that, I think there's many reasons people could point to why it should be retained.
Mm-hmm.
Even though again it has undergone a number of alterations.
Let me ask a different question here, and I'm not sure I want to ask this question, but I'm going to anyway. If by chance, and I don't know if this is even a possibility, but if there was a possibility that we could have the design review apply only to the buildings that are currently listed in the state register, and I know the state doesn't like us to use their register for this, but if there was a way that we could do that, apply it to those properties where these buildings are located, would that be any more or less interesting for you all?
It'd be more interesting for me. I like the structure that provides.
So that way we're not bringing in
Yes.
random properties to this process. And again, I don't know if it's possible to even do that. I'm curious, before I do any research on that, I'm curious what your thoughts are. And it sounds like Connor is in support of that, if it's possible.
I'm just wary of like the ad hoc nature of some of the other, you know,
Yeah.
properties. So I like some type of structure.
How exactly would that be different from now, Eric? What would,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so right now, there's no protection. So it would be, in essence, we would do a design review district that it was pretty much the whole city, but only applied to properties that were listed.
I think I would be in favor of that.
Yeah.
I am very wary that I suspect that DHP and Montpelier will not like that. But it would, I think, work for me. Again, I think I've tried to illustrate here a number of times, though, how antiquated that document is, and us kind of leaning on that is, it's a good place to start, but it's a dangerous place to be.
And I think the way that I would try to as an approach that I would try to use is that if we could, in essence, adopt the state's register as the city's register in some form or fashion. So we're kind of cross-referencing that, which we already kind of do with the city's master plan, with our cultural and historic resources map. We already are, in essence, identifying these resources as being specific to the city. So there may be an opportunity to tie it in that way, so that it's not specific to the state's list, and that we're not referencing the state list, but we're using that data to create our own.
Yes. I mean, I could say that would work. Could we add some properties to that as well? I mean, for instance, St. Stephen's was not on that list.
Well, so the way that I would look at it is, if there's a building on the property, then the whole property is there. So it's a property based, because some of the covered actions are more property based than just structural based. So for example, construction of a new building would apply to the property itself. So we would basically flag the properties rather than the actual buildings themselves.
And Eric, if we took the state register and then made it the Winooski register or whatever, then those property owners couldn't delist it on the state level, and it affects Winooski's oversight of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I just want to make sure I understand clearly.
I guess what I hear is happening to the state historic registry buildings when the landowner wants to redevelop it, they just go to the state and get it delisted. Would that still be able to happen if we were relying on the state registry?
Well, so I think what we would do is, in essence, create a local register so that they could do whatever they want with the state, but it would still they would still need to comply with the local, quote unquote, local regulation.
So Eric, would it be fair? Would it be like we're adopting as our local register all the properties that are on the state register as of date X, period, right? And so then if something gets removed from the state register after that date, okay, it's off the state register, but it's still on our local register. Does that make any sense?
That's the way that I would envision it. If it's even possible. That's the thing. I don't know if we can even create a local register without having established a certified local government or achieved that designation, and have a local historic preservation commission and some of the other requirements that are there. So I don't even know if we can do this, but as a way to not have to kind of just draw these ad hoc boundaries, that may be an option to really start to protect the buildings that have already been identified.
Yeah, and it's And
Well, I don't think that what's sorry to interrupt, Sarah.
No, that's okay.
I don't think that these what is being drawn here is entirely ad hoc. Just,
Yeah.
just to be
Yeah.
understanding of that. I guess from my standpoint, so like the west side of Main Street there, right by the bridge, our downtown kind of core, that would all those parcels would be governed by the downtown association, right?
So these are outside the design, these are outside the downtown core.
Right.
Interesting.
These
Okay.
are in our central business district.
Okay.
I have to say, I do like, except, you put the black line up there that I was suggesting. I could actually get rid of that just because I was addressing what Joe was saying, but I actually like that green, that boundary to me. It says a lot about Winooski, it's got so much of the mill, but also residential and then also commercial. I think that's a pretty nicely drawn district, honestly.
Okay.
Which isn't following what Eric is suggesting in this other way, but I guess we're talking about both things because we don't even know if we can.
I guess I was just asking if we really needed to be focusing on that, if there was going to be another body that is already reviewing design there.
Right, but I think Eric, you just said that it isn't there.
That's
Right.
correct. It is not.
He just said, he just
Yeah.
explained
So
it.
that's looping it. Okay.
So
yeah,
this
I get it.
actually makes more sense now that I understand that.
Yeah.
But are those buildings that are on Main Street, do those dots indicate that they're already on the historic registry?
Yes, any of the dots is a structure that is currently listed in the state's register.
So if we took that suggestion that Eric made, those properties would already be
Yeah.
considered important.
Correct.
Which is good. Yeah,
And I
correct.
like that.
I do too.
I guess my feeling is what kind of makes it feel ad hoc is the jut out into West Allen Street. To me, it's either like include the street or don't include it at all.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to argue a little bit the other way, Joe. I just think
Okay.
those buildings are so really neat and special.
Oh, sorry.
No?
Wait, are we
Yeah.
talking about this
The
here?
little
Or-
green jog.
West Allen, that
Yeah.
that
Got it.
cluster.
Okay.
I just have such a feeling about the history when you walk down that block about the lives of people living there, these little brick buildings that were built for, I don't know. That's just my opinion. That's a personal opinion.
I would be, if what Eric just proposed is feasible,
Yeah.
I would be in favor of that.
Yeah, I
If
think
we
it's
could
good.
somehow adopt
Yeah.
the pre-listed state register buildings and give those review. I think the problem is that, for instance, with St. Stephen's, there was vagary about whether in fact it was listed or not.
Yeah.
And so I guess when we're working off somebody else's research, that's where it becomes challenging.
Right, and again, I think what I would look to do is take any of the properties where these buildings are located and have the whole property be included. So even if there's additional buildings that may not be listed, the property itself is what we're going to be regulating. So if changes are made to the property or any structures that are on the property, that's where the design review would kick in, so that new construction as well would have to fit in with what's there to the extent possible.
That sounds fairly reasonable, Eric, I think.
Yeah.
I like it
If-
too.
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
wondering can you zoom out for a minute, Eric, would be including some properties that would not otherwise be included? Are there other properties that, or not so many?
Yeah, there's not a lot, but there are a handful thrown around. Now, for example, this property out on East Allen Street doesn't exist anymore. So some of these properties some of these buildings aren't there, but so obviously we would not include those, but there's the ones that are, we would try to include. Again, if we can do it. If not, then we're obviously looking at some level of a district and an actual boundary to include properties, other properties that are not currently
And
listed.
then if we're going to do that, then the idea of including some of that Weaver Street makes good sense, I think.
I would agree with that. And right now, I think that if we look at where the dots are, everywhere we've drawn the lines, the properties are within those for the most part. So that would seem like the easiest way to judge this if it's possible.
And again, it wouldn't prevent you from removing the building. It's just more that you're kind of giving the opportunity for a closer inspection to say,
That's right.
just, a professional could say, well, this is of exceeding cultural value and whatever is replacing it doesn't justify its removal.
Well, I like that idea if it's possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with that said, Eric, I actually overall am pretty happy with what you've proposed here. I think, like, for me, maybe the yellow district extends a little farther east than I might think is really necessary. And I think the green district, I want to be careful because I think there's a lot of really important buildings down there, but I also get the sense that it might be more attractive for development, and I don't want to stop all of that either. So I would want to be careful down there. But I think this is pretty good. I think you've managed to get most of the listed buildings in here without drawing in too many other ones. So I think you've done a good job. And if I want you to run down the idea you've proposed, but if not, this is actually a pretty good approximation of that, I think.
I agree.
Brendan, just to allay some of your concerns about the yellow district extending too far east, just to explain there, that corner parcel is the Courtyard Apartments.
Yeah.
Which is actually on the National Historic Register. It was the former Porter Screen Factory complex. So there is good reason for including that. So I think Eric has done a good job here with how this is laid out. I was just my concern about stopping mid-block on Main Street there that didn't quite make sense to me, but.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I walk, I live up on LaFountain Street, so I do this loop down to Spring Street and then back up Franklin Street a lot. And, I'm sort of talking about like maybe between Franklin and Russell Street. I don't know if you need to include that. Like, I'm talking about really like fine tooth comb is what I meant with like that. And, the apartment building that you're talking, I know what building that is. And
Yeah.
I didn't know it was on the National Register.
What was it before, Joe?
Porter Screen Factory.
A screen factory.
Yeah, it was the largest manufacturer of window screens, storm doors, storm windows in the world at one time.
Hard.
Wild.
So, Brendan, are you suggesting potentially like shaving off this northern section here along East Spring?
Not the whole thing.
Parts of it, anyway?
I don't think. Yeah, like maybe down more closer to like Franklin and Russell. I don't know.
No, I agree with that actually.
Yeah.
That was my thought.
Maybe taking these 3 properties out.
Yeah.
Yeah, something
But
like.
what is the historic property there?
That's a good
It's a
question.
very large 1920s bungalow that's it's a multifamily.
Oh, is that it's the red building? It's like the red.
I think
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah, that's a cool building, but
Well, cool doesn't mean
I don't.
historic.
if-
That parcel's pretty developed as it stands.
I was going to say, I
Yeah.
think it's also fairly well cut up.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually, yeah, so that's right now, there's 2 buildings there, well, as of the grand list data that I'm looking at, there's 8 dwellings on that property in
Yeah.
2 different buildings, so it's
Yeah.
been pretty well cut up.
Yeah, and then the
Right.
one across the street it's an apartment building. I think it used to be a bank. It's like a relatively small apartment building now. I can picture it.
Yeah, that one actually, I think they actually did some extensive renovation to maintain the historic integrity.
Yeah,
of
no,
the
from the
building.
outside, it still has the.
Yeah.
sort of look to.
That looks nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, once you sort of get, well, I don't know. Anyway, that was sort of my initial reaction, but I think, I think this is pretty good. I appreciate what you've done here.
Thank you. So, but generally, so what I will do is spend some time figuring out if we can somehow locally adopt the state's register as our own. And if not, then we have some districts that we can work with.
So
Yep.
does the state, I think, state register also have districts on it though? Right, like the housing in the green section, the little mill housing?
I think it does,
So that's a district.
but I believe the buildings are also listed,
Okay.
or they're referenced within the district as making up that district.
Yeah, I can't remember, I can look it up here. I can't remember exactly how they're listed. I think that those buildings are listed as like a cluster of historic buildings with a historic theme, but I don't think an actual district was ever listed there because there's
Okay.
no boundaries for it.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Well,
there are some other.
I think I've
actual
seen a
districts.
boundary for that though somewhere.
You have?
I
Okay.
think I have. Maybe I'm just making that up, but
Well, there is one on like in a weird place on LeClaire Lane.
LeClaire
Like,
Avenue, yeah.
There's like a strange historic district, and it was because I think somebody got it listed as a district so that there was financing available for the rehabilitation of the buildings.
So would we be able to keep that if we're gonna adopt?
Well,
I
so,
think-
I mean, right now there's no actual buildings. It's just this little street
Okay.
off of North Street. That
So there wouldn't really be a reason to do that.
I mean, I can look to see if there's a district there.
I'm pretty sure there is. Yeah, they're
And-
not. Yeah, they were subsequently added after the. So like the what's the word for it? The survey for the state historic register listings was done in 1979. I think they weren't actually adopted until like 1990, early 90s, maybe 94.
I was gonna say I think it was 92, but somewhere much later.
Yeah, and so I think, and there was have been a few little things that have been added since then because somebody was able to make the case that they should be added, and because by and large people are trying to get them delisted, not added,
Right.
and
And
these were a couple.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of is the LeClaire Avenue district and just conflating it with the LeClaire workers housing, but
I could be wrong. I'm not having my hard copy of the register in front of me right
no
now.
problem.
But I can look it up.
We can figure that out at some point. So, all right, any other comments or questions about these boundaries? Folks generally okay with them?
do we feel like, I always get sort of like parking, would a professional come in and agree with these boundary decisions from historic eyes as opposed to us just having personal opinions about it? I mean, I'm just sort of throwing that out as I think we're okay. Joe, do you?
Well, I mean, Eric has framed these around properties that were listed by a historic preservation professional.
Yeah.
And
okay.
we're kind of building the district around the higher concentrations of that. And so I don't think that anything here is unfounded as far as
Yeah. That's what I'm
why
kind of
this
getting
is-
at. Let's feel like we're founded in something that.
yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of trying to create a parameter for including these higher concentrations. Because, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, I will do some more research and report back on what I find or refine these boundaries a little bit more based on this conversation. and the notes that I've just made on this map. So, yeah, hopefully that'll get us in a good direction for our next meeting. The other thing I wanted to, oh, sorry, anything else on this?
So we can like take this map and walk around the streets ourselves, right? You sent us
Sure.
this map.
Yeah.
So that's in our package, right? Yeah.
Yep, they
Okay.
were included in the agenda, so,
Great.
obviously without the additions and,
Yes.
and subtractions, but yes, the maps are included, in the packet.
All right, I'm gonna take a picture of the screen so I can see the
And
addition.
Eric, the Winooski Historic Resources Inventory that was done in February of 2021. I just want to confirm what kind of file you would need to have an overlay on that works on this map. Is it just a GIS shape file?
Yeah.
You need to see what
Yep.
properties are indicated? Okay.
Yep, that's all I would need. And like I said, I may have it, I would just have to look to see if that was included with the reports and everything else that we got.
Great.
But again, as
Okay.
you mentioned, that's only gonna apply to the gateways, so it's not gonna be as comprehensive. It'll just provide a little additional information.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do next is just go through the actual text as well, just as kind of a refresher here for you all about what we're talking about. So there was one item as I was looking at this, I wanted to potentially clarify or make sure that it's clear to folks what we're talking about. And it's really related to item 1 for the demolition. And I'm not sure if it's clear what we're actually talking about here. So right now, as it's written, it's demolition of a building or structure in whole or in part, except as exempted under a different section, which basically talks about any specific issues, natural disaster, things like that. Those are okay to demolish without a permit. I didn't know if we wanted to change this or add language that talks about that it's, if you're doing some level of demolition that doesn't allow the building or structure to be used anymore or something like that, or if this is clear enough as it's written. I guess what I'm thinking of is if somebody comes in and says, well, I'm going to take the back of this building off and rebuild it, that I think would fall under the in part language in here, but just wanted to make sure that it's clear that, like, if there's an existing addition that is, for example, not contributing or was put on poorly and somebody wants to tear that off, does that qualify as demolition as well?
Well, wouldn't that be demolition in part? Would that come under 4 exterior remodeling related to the overall height or exterior dimensions?
It could as well, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is if with a historic structure, for example, if an addition has been added that was not contributing or is just really altered the historic character of the building, if a new owner comes in or somebody comes in and wants to take that out and return it back to its original character, do we care for design review purposes? I mean, I'm inclined to say yes, because we want to know what they're doing with it, with that space. So, but I just want to, that was something that I've been thinking about, and whether or not that is something we want to send through this process also.
I think you do. I think I'm just thinking of in Burlington, like just south of the Winooski Bridge, there's a large, now in the neighborhood that's now called the Old East End. That's kind of, they've developed the persona of that neighborhood, and there's, I think it's called the Boardroom. That brick building.
Oh yeah.
Is actually
literally right across the river here.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's one of the oldest structures actually in that neighborhood. And the property owner within the past few years. The problem with that building was when the new Winooski Bridge was built in 1928, it raised the roadbed level like 1 story up on that building, so there was a submerged floor, and it created real structural issues. And so I think there was like bowing walls and so forth because like this brick that wasn't meant to be kind of subterranean was now, under a roadbed. And so there was some review of, he basically added a story to the historic building, like cut it in the middle and lifted it up. And so there was some scrutiny given to how like that was going to be affected. Because you've really materially altered a historic structure, but the developer was able to give the reasoning why they were doing this. And it actually did make sense.
Came out nicely too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think something that granular would, to me, that's to be sort of dealt with through the actual design review process. Like I would kind of think we would say, okay, that's covered, and then so go present it to the design review board or whatever. And I would think, Eric, the hypo you pose, where there's a new addition that is sort of not historic, and they want to just take that out to return it to its historic use. I would think that would just get approved. Like that would be, it would go before the board and they would probably approve it or recommend it for approval, I guess is technically what would happen.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that type of a situation, one, you were okay with it still going through this process, which I think it should, but two, that it's clear that those types of actions are going to be swept into these regulations. Yeah. And I think it is. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't, because I sit with these documents a lot and are working on them all the time, I sometimes get lost in them and they make sense to me, but I don't know that they make sense to everybody else.
So Tommy, you're always good at figuring those out. Does this make sense to you?
So I just want to make sure that it does make sense. Yeah.
Tommy?
Yeah.
You're always good at figuring out that. Does this one make sense to you, what Eric is making sure
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, good, excellent. So I think from the text perspective, I don't think anything else has really changed since the last time we reviewed this. Previously, I had proposed striking 5 and 6. Those are back in. I think the biggest change is actually just referring to it as the Design Review Advisory Commission, per Sarah's recommendation. So that has been updated, but everything else in the text is basically still the same. So I don't think I have anything new to review text-wise with you all. So, yeah, okay. I think that might cover this section.
Wow.
So, right. So I'll do some more research and hopefully be able to report back at our next meeting to see what that has revealed. If not, like I said, we have a good basis for some boundaries that we can work from and go from there. So, great. Thank you very much. That was a good discussion.
Oh, Eric, is that everything you wanted to cover under the item 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is everything for item 5. I mean, basically, design review, I think, is fairly straightforward. It's text and it's the map. And we've spent the last several meetings getting through the text, and now I think we're in a good place with the map, generally, to get some more information, and then I can report back and we can go from there. So unless you all have anything else on design review, that I think covers it for me.
You mean we've actually covered an agenda and it's not in the block?
Shocking.
We're not talking about
what to
Abby, what an efficient meeting you run.
Yeah, really. Who needs a mic?
Finally
still
got
have city
away from
updates.
parking for a
That's right.
minute.
Exactly.
That's right. There's still
For a
city
minute.
updates to get through, so,
Yeah.
and other
Okay,
business.
yes. Let's move on to city updates then.
I will defer to the mayor for city updates first.
Not much big happening at council. You know, we only meet once in August, and we had the one meeting in July. The reminder that we'll do public hearing on the last set of changes you all worked on September 5th. That's going to be a discussion only item, so we can get that public input before we vote. We are likely to have a public hearing in September, October on the updates that Fire Chief Audie and the Housing Commission worked on to the Housing Quality Enforcement Ordinance, aka Public Building Registry. And basically all the other commissions are work planning, and we've been doing kind of administrative processes, so nothing large to update you all on.
The only updates that I have is we have two projects that the Regional Planning Commission are working on the city's behalf with. They're basically managing some consultants on the city's behalf for some transportation related projects. One is a walk bike master plan that is progressing. For the internal team, just got a draft list of projects that we're working through before we present those out to our advisory committee and then take those out more formally publicly. There is a survey open off of the, you can get the links and all the information on the RPC's website. They have a project page for that. So a lot of good resources there to see what we've been doing and what's to come. There is still more outreach that we're planning for, I think a little later in the year once the summer kind of slows down for that project. There's the other project that's going on is the LaFountain Street, Dion Street study, scoping study. There, I believe there is a public meeting on that next Thursday. Don't quote me on that though, but there is also, they have a project page on the Regional Planning Commission's website also that will have more information on that item. But those are really the only two things that I had for city updates.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Eric or the mayor?
Eric, how's the your consideration of Act 47 and how we need to rewrite our residential zoning districts going?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. I think those will be some interesting discussions for you all to have, for me to have with you all, I should say. I don't think, as I've mentioned in the past, I don't think the impacts will be big. I think the changes will be big though, for what the actual regulatory document looks like after. I think in a lot of cases, and I think I mentioned this previously, for example, we may end up with one residential zoning district at the end of it all because they've kind of congealed so much with what's now required or what the state is requiring. It may not make sense to have 3 separate residential zoning districts anymore. So that could be a big change, but not necessarily a big impact beyond what is, it may be a big impact, but the state is leading the way on that. So
It may be beneficial to us, really.
well, it could be. It could be as well. Yeah. So what I'd like to do, hopefully, is get through the set of amendments that are before council currently, and then take whatever form that of that document that they may or may not adopt, and then use that kind of as the basis, because it's going to include a lot of references as well that might need to be updated too. So I'd like to kind of bring it all forward as one rather than as piecemeal. So, but more to come. That's definitely the next thing on my list of information to bring back to you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
It's a big job. So.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I had a question. I don't know which category it's in, but I'll just ask anyway. The 3 buildings that burned last winter that are still
on Main
just
Street.
sitting there. Yeah, on Main
Yep.
Street. Are they just gonna stay vacant and half burned? Or are they gonna be?
So I,
Is there any-
I believe the property owner is doing some of their due diligence and working with the insurance companies to get to a point where they can demolish those buildings. But I'm pretty sure that's the intent, is to demolish and then redevelop that whole corner.
Eric, is that true for the properties on East Allen were on fire as well?
I think that's in a similar situation. Yeah, I think there's some insurance or some other property issues being sorted out with those. I don't know all the details of them, but that's my understanding as well.
Well, it is kind of a curious situation. I know that the Stevens and Main Street property, there was, I believe, an investigation for arson, and that was partly why it might be evidence that it's still as it is.
Yeah.
However, on East Allen Street, I think Sarah raises a good question, is like, how long are these
Yeah,
unsafe
do we have any
structures allowed
control
to
over
stand?
saying, we need to, their health, health and safety issues to them?
So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we monitor those daily for the most part through our building code folks and our health officers to make sure that they're not a hazard, and to make sure that they're structurally okay to be able to stand, and make sure they're boarded up so that people aren't in there that are going to potentially create a hazard or injure themselves or create more damage. So it is a challenge. It always is with property issues, because there are so many processes that need to be followed that they oftentimes are seen as going very slow because or that nothing's happening, but there is a lot of work being done to get to a point where the buildings can either be completely torn down or to figure out what needs to happen next. But yeah, the city is definitely paying attention and are in contact with the property owners regularly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, of course, it's not, at least, except in rare cases, it's not in the property owner's interest to just sit on a burned out building. I would think, but I don't know. From some personal experience, insurance companies can be an impediment to making anything happen in these situations. So
Yeah, I just wondered if the city itself would have any way to pressure the insurance companies to keep that moving forward quickly, but maybe not.
We're doing all we can. I'll say that. Connor, was that the building you were going to ask about as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we can move on to other business.
So other business, I don't know if we're still in our 1 meeting a month period. I'm not sure what if we set boundaries for how long that would last for. Is that, I'm assuming August is still a 1 meeting month for us.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then our next meeting won't be until September 14th. So hopefully that'll give me enough time to get through what I need to get through and have some good information to bring back to you all. So please mark your calendars for that.
Would anybody, I think we're on an adjournment, would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll move.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Say aye, or hold your hand up. Do I have to do like opposed, or I don't have to do that for this one, do I?
I mean, I think
Or abstaining, is that part of this?
I think because it was a unanimous vote, I think we're okay.
Okay, great. Have a great night,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
Enjoy the
everybody.
rest of your
Night,
evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
See you in September.